The cameras were rolling, the microphones were live, and the air inside Congress crackled with tension. What was supposed to be a routine hearing quickly unraveled into one of the most explosive showdowns in recent memory. A former Trump lawyer found himself humiliated, Jasmine Crockett pulled no punches, and a controversial conservative playbook, Project 2025, was dragged into the spotlight. This wasn't just another heated debate. It was a clash of two Americas, one fighting to preserve the rule of law, the other determined to paint itself as the victim of political persecution. Every exchange, every accusation, every deflection revealed not only the chaos in the room, but the deep fractures tearing at the country itself. The hearing room was charged with tension from the very beginning. Cameras rolled, lawmakers shuffled papers, and witnesses adjusted their microphones as the stage was set for what should have been a routine congressional hearing but quickly turned into one of the most explosive confrontations of the year. At the center stood Representative Jasmine Crockett, a sharp-witted Democrat known for her fiery questioning style, facing Trump's former attorneys. Once entrusted with defending one of the most powerful figures in the world, now under public scrutiny themselves. Crockett wasted no time, steering the discussion away from vague political rhetoric and toward hard accountability, determined to expose what she described as corruption, hypocrisy, and a blatant disregard for the rule of law. Every eye in the chamber followed as she laid out names, charges, and patterns of misconduct, her words carrying the weight of years of frustration with Trump's legal team and the system that seemed to shield them. This was no mere questioning. It was a cross-examination on behalf of the American people, with Crockett playing both prosecutor and truth-teller, holding Trump's allies to account in a way few others had dared. The atmosphere was electric, some lawmakers nodding in approval, others rolling their eyes in defense of Trump. But one thing was undeniable. Crockett had seized control of the narrative. When she began rattling off names, Robert Shealy, Kenneth Chesebro, Jeffrey Clark, Matthew DePerno, John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, Michael Flynn, Rudy Giuliani, the room fell silent. It wasn't a random list but a roll call of infamy, each name carrying the weight of criminal charges, suspensions, or disbarments. With surgical precision, Crockett revealed a devastating truth. Trump had not surrounded himself with the best people, as he so often claimed, but with a rogues gallery of disgraced attorneys whose downfalls told a larger story of loyalty over competence, theatrics over professionalism, and ambition over ethical duty. The irony was impossible to ignore. Trump had promised America top-tier legal minds to defend his presidency, yet what he delivered was a legal dream team that had devolved into a legal nightmare. The heart of the hearing came when Representative Jasmine Crockett turned her focus on Jim Trusty, one of Trump's former attorneys. Her tone was sharp but controlled as she asked, "Mr. Trusty, you represented Donald Trump for about a year, didn't you?" When he confirmed, she pressed further, "And you still have your bar card?" Trusty smirked, trying to deflect with humor. "Unless I get targeted just for daring to represent a former president, yes, I do." But Crockett cut him down with one swift line. "Well, you've done better than most who've dealt with him." The remark underscored the chaos surrounding Trump's legal orbit and set the stage for her central argument, the double standard shielding Trump from accountability. Crockett drilled Trusty with precise yes-or-no questions. Had he ever seen a defendant facing over 80 criminal counts across 4 jurisdictions remain free pre-trial? Had he ever seen someone repeatedly violate gag orders without landing in jail? Had he ever seen a defendant accused of witness intimidation avoid detention entirely? Trusty stumbled through evasions, citing mafia and gang cases, but Crockett was relentless, shutting him down with crisp interjections. "So that's a no." When she highlighted Trump's staggering 80 charges, something that would have any ordinary defendant behind bars, the weight of her words filled the chamber. Pre-trial detention, she reminded, isn't about guilt but about accountability, public safety, and equal treatment under the law. Yet Trump, despite his unprecedented legal exposure, was free to campaign, fly private, and hold rallies. By the end, Crockett had boxed Trusty in. Either Trump was being treated differently, or the justice system itself was broken. The silence that followed revealed the devastating truth. Trump's privileges exposed not just his unique status, but a system where power bends the rules that ordinary Americans cannot escape. If there was one issue that crystallized the imbalance of justice more than any other, it was Donald Trump's repeated violations of gag orders. Representative Jasmine Crockett leaned in, her tone sharp and deliberate. "Mr. Trusty, have you ever had a defendant violate a gag order, Not once, not twice, but 10 times or more, and the judge didn't lock them up. Trusty paused, reaching for safe ground. In 35 years, I've never even seen a defendant gagged, he replied, an attempt to cast Trump's case as unprecedented. But Crockett pounced. Exactly. So you've never had to deal with someone breaking it over and over again, because most defendants never get that kind of leeway in the first place. The exchange was devastating in its simplicity. Ordinary defendants who defy a judge's orders are swiftly punished with contempt charges or jail time. Yet Trump, despite openly defying restrictions meant to protect witnesses and preserve trial integrity, remained untouched. For Crockett, this wasn't about partisan politics. It was about whether the justice system itself retained any credibility. If someone as powerful as Trump could flout a gag order again and again without consequence, what message did that send to every other defendant in America? And she wasn't finished. Shifting her focus to witness intimidation, Crockett drilled down with the same precision. Mr. Trusty, in your experience, have you ever had a defendant intimidating witnesses, and somehow that defendant didn't end up in jail, even for a day or two? Trusty leaned on his resume, invoking mafia prosecutions, gang trials, even death penalty cases. In every scenario, he admitted, proven intimidation was met with immediate consequences: incarceration, isolation, punishment. Crockett let the words hang, then delivered the blow. Exactly. In every other case, intimidation equals jail time. But not with Trump. The silence that followed was heavy. By invoking organized crime, Crockett framed Trump's behavior not as political bluster but as obstruction on par with mob bosses and gang leaders. Figures who, despite their power, could not escape accountability. And yet Trump, with his massive platform, continued to attack prosecutors, judges, and witnesses in plain sight, still walking free. Crockett's point was impossible to ignore. If the courts could hold gangsters accountable, why not a former president? The implication was chilling. Justice was no longer blind, but bending under the weight of power. After dismantling Trump's legal team over double standards in the justice system, Representative Jasmine Crockett shifted the hearing towards something even more consequential than Trump's indictments: Project 2025. Her target was Stephen Hamilton, Executive Director of America First Legal and a contributor to the initiative. With calm precision, she led him step by step through the document's radical provisions. Mr. Hamilton, you're familiar with Project 2025's mandate for leadership, correct? She asked. In fact, I am, he replied confidently. And you actually wrote parts of it dealing with the Department of Justice? Sure did. That admission was all Crockett needed. Like an indictment, she read out its most alarming proposals: abolish the Department of Education, eliminate the Department of Commerce, deploy the military against American citizens under the Insurrection Act of 1807, reinstate Schedule F to purge career civil servants and replace them with partisan loyalists, and restrict the FBI from combating disinformation, even when foreign adversaries like Russia or China are involved. One by one, the items sounded less like policy and more like an authoritarian playbook. Crockett made the stakes plain. Project 2025 is not about improving government. It's a playbook for authoritarianism. Her tone then shifted from sharp cross-examination to something closer to a warning. She reminded the chamber that talk of dictatorship had too often been brushed off as humor, even treated as a joke. But to her, there was nothing funny about it. In the United States of America, dictatorships are never funny, she declared, cutting through the partisan noise with moral clarity. To Crockett, Project 2025 was not a stack of think tank proposals but a blueprint for consolidating power, dismantling institutions, militarizing domestic law enforcement, silencing federal watchdogs, and eroding checks on the presidency. Dictatorship, she implied, doesn't arrive with a bang. It creeps in through policies, mandates, and unchecked executive authority. By framing the plan this way, Crockett widened the hearing scope beyond Trump's trials to the broader future of American democracy. The real question was no longer about whether Trump was receiving special treatment in court, but whether the nation itself was sleepwalking into a system where power could be centralized, accountability erased, and political opposition crushed. Her warning wasn't just for Republicans across the aisle. It was for Americans watching at home. Pay attention, she urged, because Project 2025 doesn't merely tinker with government. It lays the foundation for authoritarian rule. In that moment, Crockett reminded the chamber, and the country, that the hearing wasn't just about politics. It was about whether America still had the courage to reject authoritarianism before it was too late. No congressional hearing this charged could end without a counterstrike. As soon as Representative Jasmine Crockett concluded her blistering takedown of Trump's lawyers and Project 2025, Republicans on the committee moved quickly to flip the script. The first salvo came from a Republican representative from Wyoming, who bypassed defending Trump's legal team on the merits and instead took aim at Representative Dan Goldman, a Democrat and former prosecutor. The accusation was blunt. Goldman wasn't just an impartial lawmaker, he had a personal stake in Trump's prosecution. She pointed to his involvement with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg's case and alleged he had helped prepare Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer-turned-star witness, for testimony. The implication was clear. Goldman wasn't merely observing the case, he was part of the machinery working to bring Trump down. But the attack didn't stop there. She escalated, noting Goldman had paid over $150,000 to a firm connected to Judge Merchan's daughter, raising the specter of conflict of interest. And then came the nuclear moment. The claim that the ranking Democratic member had once been Jeffrey Epstein's fixer. The words landed like a grenade. Gasps, whispers, and raised eyebrows rippled across the chamber. Democrats erupted, demanding the comments be stricken from the record as personal, unfounded, and irrelevant. Republicans, however, doubled down, insisting the remarks reflected facts reported in the news. Chaos consumed the room. Motions, objections, counter-objections, procedure became the weapon of the hour. What had begun as Crockett's methodical exposure of Trump's legal vulnerabilities and the authoritarian ambitions of Project 2025 was suddenly buried beneath a political brawl. For Republicans, the goal wasn't to address substance. It was to muddy the waters, redirect the spotlight, and leave viewers questioning Democrats' credibility instead. By the end, the hearing resembled a battlefield more than a fact-finding mission. Crockett and her Democratic allies had tried to focus on the rule of law, systemic double standards, and the dangerous implications of Project 2025. Republicans had countered with accusations of bias, corruption, and scandal, no matter how tenuous. The result wasn't resolution, it was escalation. For anyone watching, the message was unmistakable. Congress itself has become a stage for America's divides. One side warns of creeping authoritarianism, the other casts itself as the victim of partisan persecution. Both sides shout past one another, and the very institutions meant to uphold order appear increasingly fragile. In the end, this wasn't just a hearing about Donald Trump, Project 2025, or even the Department of Justice. It was a hearing about America's political soul, a test of whether truth and accountability can survive in an era when power, loyalty, and survival so often matter more than facts. And as the gavel finally came down, one thing was undeniable: the fight was far from over.